Dear student, welcome back again in our today's session. So as you can see that today I am going to discuss about on the concept of secondary data. In my previous lecture, I have already discussed about on the concept of primary data, methods of primary data, and the advantages and limitations of primary data. And in this lecture, I am going to discuss in detail about the secondary data. So without further ado, let's start our today's topic. So first we will understand the concept of secondary data. So basically if we talk about the secondary data, it refers to information that has already been collected, published, or recorded by other researchers, organizations, or institutions for the purpose other than the current study. So, in simple terms, we can say that about the secondary data. Secondary data refers to the information that has already been gathered, documented, or published by the previous researchers, institutions, or organizations for a different purpose than those of the current research studies. Unlike primary data, which is collected firsthand by the researcher specifically for their unique objectives, secondary data is pre-existing and often available through the various sources such as academic journals, government reports, industry studies, or historical records. This type of data can include the statistical information, survey results, organizational reports, census data, or any other recorded information that has been previously used or analyzed by someone else. So this is all about the concept of secondary data. Let's understand once more. So basically secondary data refers to the information that has already been collected, published or recorded by other researchers, organizations or institutions for the purpose other than the current study. Now, after discussing about the concept of secondary data, let's understand the sources of secondary data. So if we talk about the sources of secondary data, so as you can see that secondary data basically is derived from the information that is already being collected, proceed, and often analyzed by others, making it more accessible and cost-effective resources for researchers. The source for secondary data can be broadly categorized into a published and unpublished. So each offering a unique advantages and potential limitations. So understanding these sources in details helps the researchers to effectively accessing information to support their findings to their studies. First, we will understand about the published sources. So basically, if we talk about the published sources is generally and of secondary data are materials that have been made publicly available, typically through the formal publication channels. These sources are widely used in academic research, policy analysis, and various other fields due to their accessibility and the credibility often associated with them. And now if we talk about the published sources, so as you can see that the first one is books. So basically books are a fundamental source of secondary data, offering a comprehensive coverage on a wide range of topics. They are authored by expert scholars or participants to compile the existing research, theories, and the case studies into a cohesive narrative. Books provide in-depth insight, historical perspectives, and the critical analysis, making them valuable for understanding. And for instance, if we talk about the books, a researcher studying educational theories might rely on a seminal books by renowned the educators and theorists to build a theoretical framework for their study. However, books may sometimes be outdated, especially in a rapidly evolving fields. So it is important to cross-reference with some more current sources. After books, now the second one is academic journals. So basically, if we talk about the academic journals, that means academic journals are a gold mine of secondary data, particularly in a specialized field. These peer-reviewed publications contain original research review, articles, case studies, and a meta-analysis conducted by experts in the field. The rigorous review process ensures that the information is credible and of high quality. Researchers often use academic journals to access the latest research findings, theoretical advancement, and empirical studies. For example, a sociologist studying a social behavior might consult the journals like American Sociological Review or a Social Science Quarterly Journal to find the relevant studies and data. However, access to some journals may require subscriptions, and the data within them is often tailored to a very specific research questions. Now, the third one is research paper. Research paper, particularly those presented at a conference or published in a journals, are another source of and another important source of secondary data. These papers often contain a detailed methodology, results, and discussion of original research, providing a valuable data that can be used for the further analysis. For example, in the field of environmental science, a researcher might use the data from the previously published research paper or a climate change models to compare within the current data. So overall, we can say that the research papers are usually highly focused, offering the specific insight into a narrow topics, which can be beneficial for both for the limiting and depending on the scope of the current research. Now, after the research paper, government reports. If we talk about the government reports, these are the rich source of reliable and valid data. These reports are typically produced by government agencies and cover a wide range of topics, including the economic indicators, publications, populations, statistics, health data, and unemployment and public policies analysis. And government reports are often used to research due to their comprehensive nature and the large scale of data collection. And for instance, a public health researcher might use data from the World Health Organization's report to analyze the global health trends. However, while government reports are generally reliable, researcher must be continuous of any political bias of outdated information. Now, the next one is newspaper and magazines. If we talk about the newspaper and magazines, that means newspapers and magazines offer a wealth of information on a current events, public opinions, and trends on the social issues. They are particularly useful for the research that requires a contemporary data or an understanding of societal attitudes and responses at a specific time. For example, a researcher studying a media influences on a public opinion might analyze from the major newspaper like the New York Times or the Guardian's magazines, especially those focusing on a specific industries or topics, provide an insight into a market trends, consumer behavior, or a culture phenomena. However, these sources can sometimes be biased, and the information may leave lack of depth found in academic sources. Now, Next, we are going to discuss about the unpublished sources. So if we talk about the unpublished sources, basically unpublished sources of secondary data are materials that have not published from anywhere. So and have not been formally published but still contain a valuable information. Those sources are often more difficult to access but can provide a unique and depth knowledge about the particular phenomena, particular topic, and data are not available elsewhere in this type of category. So if we talk about the unpublished sources, as you can see that the first one is internal sources and internal records. So basically internal records refers to the data and documents maintained by the organizations for their operational needs. These can include the sales records, employment records, financial statements, meeting of minutes, and customer databases. Internal records are particularly valuable for the business research as they provide for detailed insight into our organizational operations, performance, and market behavior. For instance, a company looking to analyze its sales trends might use its historical sales records as a secondary data, and access to our internal records is typically restricted to organizational insiders, which can limit their availability for external researchers. Now, the next one is letters. Letters are very important, very essential as unpublished sources. So, letters, whether personal or professional, can be a rich source of qualitative data. They offer insight into our personal thoughts, relationships, historical events, and organizational decisions. For example, letters between historical figures can provide context and personal perspectives or major events, making them invaluable or historians. In business, research correspondence between the executives can shed a light on a strategic decisions and organizational culture. However, letters are often private and access may be restricted, especially if they contain a sensitive information. Now, the next one is diaries. So basically, we talk about the diaries. Diaries are personal records that document daily activities, thoughts, and feelings over the time. They are particularly valuable in a sociological, and historical research, providing an intimate glimpse into our lives and experiences of individuals. For example, the diaries of Anne Frank offer a profound insight into the experiences of Jews during the Holocaust. In contemporary research, diaries can be used to study behaviors such as consumer habits or health practices. Diaries are highly subjective and may reflect a personal biasness, but they offer a depth of personal experience that is difficult to capture through the other means. And now, unpublished research. Unpublished research includes thesis dissertation and working papers that have not been formally published anywhere. These documents offer a contain original research, extensive literature review, and detailed data that can be highly relevant to the new studies. And for instance, a research might use the data from unpublished doctoral dissertation on a social media's impact on youth to support their own study. And while unpublished research can be difficult to access, the university libraries and academic networks they provide opportunities to obtain these sources. So, however, since they have not undergo the rigorous peer review process, the quality and the reliability of the unpublished research must be carefully evaluated. So, both published and unpublished sources of secondary data offer a valuable insight and information that can significantly enhance the research. Published sources like books, academic journals, research paper, government reports, and newspaper provide very important, very essential, and accessible and credible data that can be used to support a wide range of studies. And on the other hand, unpublished sources such as internal records, letters, diaries, and unpublished research offer a unique and often hard to find data that can provide the depth and context, especially in a qualitative research. By effectively utilizing these sources, researcher can build on existing knowledge, explore new angles, and provide a more comprehensive analysis in their studies. So this is all about the methods of secondary data. Now, next we are going to discuss about the advantages and disadvantages of secondary data. So if we talk about the advantages of secondary data, so as you can see that the first one is cost effective and time saving. One of the primary benefits of using existing sources, whether the published or unpublished, is that it saves our time and money. Researchers do not need to invest the resources in collecting the new data from the scratch, which can be both expensive and time consuming. Instead, they can leverage the data that has already been gathered and is readily available. Now, the second one is, if we talk about the advantages, the second point is provide a broad context and background. So, existing sources often provide a broad overview and context for a research topic. This is especially valuable when starting a new study, as it helps researchers to understand the research trends, patterns, and historical backgrounds of the subject area. It can be also assist in identifying gaps in the existing literature and shaping the direction of the current research. Now, the third point is useful for longitudinal studies. So basically, longitudinal studies involve observing the same variable over the long periods. Using the existing data, especially from the sources that span years, allow the researchers to analyze trends over the time without having to wait for a new data to be collected. This is particularly useful for the studies that aim to understand the changes, development of pattern over the long period. Now, next we are going to discuss about the disadvantages. So let's understand about the disadvantages. As you can see that we have mentioned a few disadvantages. So the first one is may not be specific to the current research problem. This is the first limitations of secondary data. That means exiting the data may not perfectly align with the specific research questions or objectives of a new study. The data may have been collected for the different purpose, which might limit its relevance or applicability. Researchers may need to adjust their research questions or find a ways to adapt the available data to fit their needs, which can be challenging. Now, the second one is quality and accuracy may be questionable. That means the quality and accuracy of existing data can be a concern, especially if the data is outdated or if it was not collected using the methodologies that are differ from those currently considered the best practices. If the data is old, it may be no longer reflect the current situation, leading to a potentially misleading the conclusions. Researcher must critically evaluate the sources of the data to ensure it is a reliable and valid for their purpose. Now, the third one is lack of control over the data collection. So if we talk about the lack of control over the data collection, that means when using the existing source, researchers have no control over how the data was collected. They must rely on the original researchers' methods, which may not align with their own standards or needs. This lack of control can introduce the biasness or errors that that the researchers cannot correct and potentially affecting the validity of their findings. So overall, we can say that using the published and unpublished sources offer a significant advantages such as a cost saving, time efficiency, and access to the broad contextual information. However, these benefits come with the trade-offs, including the potential misalignment with the specific research needs, questions about the data quality and accuracy, and the inability to control the data collection process. Researcher must carefully weigh these pros and cons when deciding whether to use the existing sources in their studies. So overall, we can say that about the secondary data. Secondary data serves as a very essential tool in a research, offering a wealth of information that can complement or even substitute primary data collection. While it requires a careful evaluation and consideration to ensure it meets the specific needs of the study, the use of secondary data can significantly enhance the depth and scope of research, making it an very important resources in many fields of that study. So the secondary data is very essential for every researcher. That's all about the secondary data. Thank you.